Hey everybody, I hope everybody had a very good WrestleMania weekend. And if you don't give a shit about wrestling, I hope that you had a good regular weekend. Most importantly, I hope you found time to watch Shazam, the latest Warner Brothers DC Comics superhero movie to hit multiplexes. Because that's the film we're going to be talking about today. Kind of. So I already reviewed Shazam, and I liked it very much. I thought it was a really awesome movie. I'm going to link the actual printed review that I wrote in the description below. So I liked Shazam quite a bit. I had a couple of minor quibbles with the movie, nothing that was that drastic, but I thought it was a really fun movie. And it reminded me of a different version of Shazam that almost happened, but didn't. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm a huge screenplay nerd. I've probably read thousands of scripts. I really enjoy reading unproduced screenplays, things that were commissioned to be big Hollywood-type blockbuster movies, but then never got made for whatever reason or another, or were made in a drastically different form because they were rewritten or what have you. And sometimes it can be fun to kind of see how a project maybe started out at a studio and then where it actually wound up. So today, we're not going to be talking about the new Shazam that much, except in relation to a version of Shazam that could have been made back in 2008. So 10 years ago, this was about the time that The Rock was first attached to play Black Adam, the Captain Marvel villain who, curiously, is completely absent from Shazam except for one key piece of the film where they're talking about him without naming him. And, this has been over a decade that The Rock has been, loosely attached to play this character. Black Adam's a villain, but he's sort of an anti-hero. You could definitely make a movie about just Black Adam and it would work. He's that kind of character. And back in 2008 was when it really seemed like the movie was gonna happen. There were several DC movies at the time around 2007, 2008 that all seemed primed to go, and almost none of them actually came to fruition. And that's right around the time that Marvel started making their current slate of films. When Iron Man happened, there was this other set of DC movies that could have been released sort of in parallel to all the Phase 1 Marvel movies, but most of them fell apart. That includes Joss Whedon's Wonder Woman that we thankfully never got. David Goyer had done a version of The Flash that didn't get made. There was also a Green Arrow movie where he was trapped in a prison called Supermax. That was a really cool concept that also didn't get made. It was all this interesting stuff DC was doing, and it would have been really interesting to see what happened if they had actually been made. I wrote about this 5 years ago for a now defunct website called Dead Shirt. I've linked that in the description below as well in case you're curious about other similar films. But today, though, we're going to talk about John August's screenplay draft of Billy Batson and the Legend of Shazam, which is what it was titled when he first came on the project. There are two surviving drafts of John August's version of Shazam out there on the internet if you go peeking around. I'm not going to link them in the video because, that's just asking for trouble. But they're out there if you want to look for them. He had two drafts, one in August of 2008 and another one in November of 2008. The November draft is a little tighter from a structural perspective, but I think it's a lesser movie, or would have been a lesser movie. It's not quite as interesting, and it's not quite as heartfelt. But the August draft is really good. There's also a version that William Goldman wrote that I'm not a big fan of, but I'm not really a big fan of anything William Goldman did in the twilight of his career. Rest in peace, though. But John August is a screenwriter who you may be familiar with. He wrote the movie Go. He wrote both Charlie's Angels films that McG directed. He's written a lot of movies for Tim Burton, most notably Big Fish, and some other stuff. Really talented guy. If anything, he's actually bigger in the industry now, not so much as just being a big-name screenwriter, but also he's done a lot of work on the software side of developing programs and apps and things for screenwriters to make their jobs easier. Really cool guy. His website is a huge repository for information about screenwriting and things like that. He's been a big resource for up-and-coming screenwriters for a very long time. So seeing a guy like this approach a superhero movie is kind of fun because he's a really sound story architect. He has pretty good dialogue and really strong instincts. And his version of Shazam, I think, would have been really special. It has a similar tone to the film that was released this weekend, But the biggest key difference, I think, is that John August's version of Shazam owed a lot to the actual Captain Marvel comics that preceded it, whereas Shazam, the movie that we got, is much more a straight adaptation of the more recent Shazam comics that Jeff Johns has done, first with Gary Frank and then later with artist Dale Eaglesham, which is a sort of a post-New 52 redone version of the Captain Marvel mythos. The key thing I think that's different is that the original Captain Marvel comics are very much about Billy Batson and him becoming Captain Marvel, Shazam, whatever. And the newer comics are much more about the larger family that he has, like this bigger unit around him of other orphans like living together in this foster home. I think that take on the material is really cool, and I love it a lot. I think that the new Shazam movie, I think Darla is like the character find of the year, you know. But I did watch the film and feel a little bit of a weird nostalgia twinge for wanting a more one-to-one actual what Billy Batson was like before Jeff Johns did this big retcon. The key thing at the center of John August's version of Captain Marvel is that Billy Batson is like a good kid. He's a fundamentally good person, kind of. He's like a really good, upstanding kid. And I feel like every newer version of Captain Marvel always makes Billy like a little bit of a young ne'er-do-well, and I understand why. It's supposed to give him like more of an arc, but it takes away what I think is special about the premise. The idea that this wizard Shazam has all this power and needs to have a mortal champion on the earthly realm, and he chooses like a child. And it's crazy to everyone else in the story, in any version of the story, that like Shazam would pick a little kid. Like in Judd Winnick and Josh Middleton's comic First Thunder, where Superman and Captain Marvel like first meet and like fight and stuff, there's this really powerful scene where Superman discovers that this person he's been fighting is a kid, and he's furious. Like, why would you give these powers to a child? It's just not fair. It's not right. And there's a similar scene in John August's script for Shazam where Black Adam, the character of The Rock, the villain The Rock's supposed to play, discovers that Billy Batson is a little kid. And he's like it fucks him up. It's like, why would the wizard do this? This is so cruel. It's not correct. But the script does a really good job, I think, of explaining why the wizard does that. In the movie version of Shazam that we got, which is completely unrelated to this draft, and I'll have to, kind of explain the plot to that one in a moment. But in the movie version, the biggest thing is that, like, we get that Billy is, like, deep down, beneath all of his, like, hijinks and stuff, a good person, even though he's outwardly, kind of a prick, basically. He's, like, kind of like a jerky kid. In the comics, the newer version of Shazam is much more like a jerky kid. In the movie, he's, like, sweet, but, like, broken or whatever. But ultimately, it feels like the wizard picks him because he doesn't have any other choices, which is weird. It's just like he's picking him because, like, all right, I'm picking you because what else am I going to do? In John August's script, the reason Billy is chosen is because of his inherent goodness. Okay, so we're getting ahead of ourselves. The John August draft of Shazam runs about 124 pages. The November draft's like 120. It's a little bit tighter, but not by much. Anyway, it follows two key characters. It opens, of course, with our villain, Black Adam, who lived, hundreds of years ago in Kahndaq, it's like a DC fictional Middle Eastern country near Egypt. It's basically Egypt. And he's the last person the wizard Shazam chose to be his champion. He basically chose this, like, heroic, courageous man, not understanding that this heroic, courageous man, given godlike powers, would become like a tyrant in his country. And while being like this massive tyrant, like this like god emperor person, some other people kill Black Adam's family, and it sends him in a rage. He tries to destroy a bunch of people. The wizard Shazam has to keep him in like this scarab to stop him from killing more people, basically. The opening of the script is very much just like a scene from like The Mummy Returns or something, which is kind of funny considering that it was going to be The Rock. It's like super heavy The Mummy vibes. So that's Black Adam. He has Shazam's powers, super strong, all this stuff. Wants to avenge his dead family in a scarab that gets found years later by archaeologists. You kind of know the gist there. And then we cut kind of to present day, and we meet Billy Batson and Freddie Freeman, who's like his, foster brother. They're both orphans, and they both live with this foster family, these two parents, Dale and Kitty, who are like super shitty parents. It's not like in the movie where they got this like awesome home full of orphans, and the parents themselves are orphans, and it's this big sweet like hugathon. Here, they're just like trash. They're just trash people. But they're, like, not unredeemable. I think what's interesting about the way John August chose to write this story is that there are a lot of characters in the movie who are either bad or villainous or not so good, but there's, like, a fundamental goodness in them in there, and I feel like being around Billy brings it out. And I think that's a really interesting way to tell the story. Anyway, Kitty and Dale are, like, crappy parents, and they only have these two foster kids so they can take their, like, government assistance checks, and then they just, like, go on trips and stuff and make the kids eat peanut butter out of a jar and nothing else and stuff like that. And Billy and Freddie are like kind of miserable there, but they're like smart kids and like they get by. And basically Billy ends up taking this weird online quiz on their like geriatric computer, and it's sort of a it's John August's way of making a modern version of the wizard testing Billy, and it's like a morality quiz, and it relates to like some lessons they're learning in school about having a code and having to know what is right, what is wrong. And Billy passes the test perfectly. And like it's great because it's this little like one scene of him answering an online quiz basically. I mean, it sort of predates like the phenomenon of like BuzzFeed quizzes and stuff like that. It perfectly distills why he's like a hero, even though he's a kid. And basically it gives them coordinates to a map, then it's on a train, just like in the movie, and then they go, well, Billy, not Freddy, just Billy goes to the Rock of Eternity, where the Wizard Shazam is dying because he's old, and the sins are all there too, like all the 7 deadly sins in gargoyle form are there, and it's very similar to the way it is in the movie. And then he gets the powers, and then he becomes, Marvel. Now, obviously, at this time, DC was a lot less concerned about releasing a movie about a character called Captain Marvel, because this actually predates Marvel, having their resurgence, making Carol Danvers Captain Marvel and stuff like that. So there's none of that, like, his name is Shazam bullshit. He's Captain Marvel. And this version of the story also keeps intact the fact that, like, Billy's parents were, like, archaeologists. So you have these, like, dream memory sequences of his actual parents, and you see one of my personal favorite elements of the Captain Marvel mythology, that the reason Captain Marvel looks the way he does is that it's, like, Billy's projection of what he remembers of his father. I think that's a really cool concept. That, like, this little boy says a magic word and becomes a superhero, and he looks like the only thing he's ever had that's a concept of, like, of goodness and, like, humanity is his dad that's gone. And, it plays very similarly to the way the movie Shazam does. He becomes Captain Marvel. He doesn't immediately have like a super suit. He actually kind of has to put that together himself. He has to learn how his powers work. Freddy helps him. Freddy videotapes him. So a lot of those beats are kind of even in the story. It's a normal, rational place to come to in the story to note that if a boy becomes a superhero, his best friend knows comics, and that's universal. It doesn't seem like the writers of the new version like got it from this draft. It's just kind of obvious. And there's a lot less of the sort of back and forth that the movie has. Like, I feel like the movie version of Shazam that we got puts Billy up against Dr. Sivana. And, like, Dr. Sivana as a villain in the movie, as a kid that wasn't chosen, it creates this thing of, like, it creates this thing of, here's a little boy that was chosen, a little boy that didn't, and grew up to be like this evil person, and they kind of fight. But I don't feel like there's a strong ideological imbalance between the two of them. Like, one of them is a little boy who grew up spoiled because his parents were shitty, and the other one is not. It doesn't have that same, like, thematic undercurrent throughout the movie. That is one of, I think, the weaker elements of the movie Shazam. In John August's draft, we don't actually meet Black Adam until, like, the third act. Like, I mean, we meet him in the opening, but he doesn't come into play in the main story until much later. So much of the movie is really just Billy trying to figure out what to do with his powers and trying to be a good person. They try to get out of their orphanage home place and, like, get their own, like, apartment, but they end up just being in a hotel, burning through the money that, like, TMZ precursors give Freddy for videos of Captain Marvel. The thing is, it gives you so much more time with Billy and Freddy. And this is obviously ripe opportunity for a lot of comedy and stuff. It gives you a lot of space for, like, there to be amusing, bits about... It's just Big, right? I mean, every movie version of Shazam that you could write is essentially the movie Big with Tom Hanks with superpowers. So I think John August and the creators behind the new version of the movie came to the same conclusion in that respect. There is a lot of that kind of humor. There's a weird subplot with Billy as Marvel, going on dates with his, like, school teacher and stuff that's a little bit iffy. But all the comedy that comes from that is all really natural, and it feels really honest. I feel like the comedy in Shazam is really sweet and fun, but a lot of it's a little more visual and kind of punchy. Here, it feels more character-based, and I love it. You really get caught up in it, because the fact that this undercurrent of goodness, like, what is goodness, what is moral, what is right, feeds through the movie kind of like a Pixar flick. It has that... Like, it feels like the way really good animation is done. Like, there's that clarity of theme and story that a lot of these bigger superhero movies don't quite have. The version of Shazam that we got is 2 hours and 10 minutes long. This script theoretically would run 2 hours, but realistically, as you read it, it would probably run closer to like an hour 40, an hour 45, and it does so much more in a shorter period of time than I think the movie version that we got, because it doesn't have, like, 7 other children to, like, fit into the story, and it doesn't have to do as much work to flesh out Savannah. This doesn't have Dr. Zavanna. It just has Black Adam, who's really a straightforward character. And there's not all the other orphan kids. It's just Billy and Freddy's relationship. So their relationship, I think, is actually a lot more layered as a result. And it's just fun, man. I mean, like, considering the fact this was written in 2008, and you think about the direction that the first few DC movies ended up going in, it's interesting to see a version like this that even like 10 years ago was like on the right path. You really get the sense that like DC fucked up by going in the direction they went and not starting here. Because in some cases, in some ways, a lot of these scripts at the time had strengths that the Marvel movies that were made didn't actually possess. Like, I think if these movies were coming out at the same time and the two companies were kind of reacting to each other in something closer to real time, I think we would have gotten better movies overall from both studios. One of the things I love about this script, in the sense of the themes and stuff, is once Black Adam does show up, there's not a super prolonged third act that does what every other superhero movie for the last like 10 years has done, where there's like a big like thing destroying the Earth and all this stuff. There's the inherent threat that Black Adam is capable of destroying the Earth, but he just wants this MacGuffin character in the story, this little girl Maya, who is kept in the Rock of Eternity, who has like the power to like turn back time. He wants to use her to go back and stop his family from being killed, but that'll like unmake reality. But there isn't any kind of like big death ray or like big crazy destruction. Black Adam is like a really like logical character. You know what I mean? He has all this godlike power. He gets out of his scarab. He wants to fight Captain Marvel and get him to take him to the Rock of Eternity so he can save his family. It highlights why a child has to be the champion of Shazam. Because a full-grown man like Adam has been through so many things. He's been a leader in his nation and stuff. He only sees things in this really depressing, pragmatic way. There's a scene that's like probably the best scene in the movie. A lot of superhero movies end with like a villain holding over like the character's like best friend and then like their girlfriend, or like the hero's like teacher and then like a love interest or something, and it's like choose one. Then he tries to save both of them. It's really funny in Batman Forever. It's not as funny in like Spider-Man or whatever. And this has a scene like that, but it's not like that. It's not like the end of the Dark Knight and all that with the boats and stuff. It's this moment of, throughout the movie, we have understood and felt like Billy's a real hero because he's used his powers largely for good. He hasn't strayed from that. He's like a fundamentally honest kid. And, we know that because of the quiz he passed, that was like the test of his morality. And then Black Adam's just throwing all these curveballs into that. He's like, all right, well, he just starts throwing people into the sky. Like, which of these two people are you going to save? That one has a kid, that one doesn't. Do you save the parent? And he's just trying to explain to this kid, like, it's just a test. The test isn't real. This is real life. And having powers, being almost like a god, you do get to choose. And your choice is right because you're the one with the power. Because he has just such a jaundiced sense of justice from being like this messed up, like power-hungry, angry old dude. And Billy's like, 13, and he has a fundamental, innate sense of what is right. He tries to uphold that. And it's cool. It's cool seeing this moment of him trying to save these people anyway, because he doesn't have the sense that, like, he can't. You know what I mean? He hasn't lived in this fucked up world long enough to see it any other way. Even though he hasn't had a great upbringing, he didn't have, like, Mom, Pa Kent, teaching him what's right and wrong. Like, it's just, like, a fundamental thing about, like, youth. Like, he still holds on to that. And it's like, inspiring, This is a really great moment where he is doing this and he is trying to save these people anyway, and then he accidentally turns back into Billy, and that's the moment Black Adam discovers he's just a kid. And the way John August writes it is like, for a moment, Black Adam interacting with him is like, it's like he's reminded of the fact he almost misses being that naive. You know what I mean? He's like nostalgic for not being a broken up piece of shit. And he saves Billy, and like, there's not crazy malice in his plan. He's not like, I'm gonna fucking kill everybody because I'm evil. He's like, I need you to do this thing to bring my family back, and if you don't, I will kill people, but only to like get you to do what I want. It's interesting. It plays really well, and I think it would have been a fun thing for The Rock to do. I think he could have pulled it off really well, because he's just supposed to feel like a hero who just went astray, rather than being like a Doctor Doom type or something. But the number one thing I love about this script versus what the movie we got, like my biggest complaint about Shazam the movie, is that as much as I like Zachary Levi, the guy from Chuck, as Shazam, he's fun. He has like this really broad, like comedic style, and he really does seem like just a big kid full of excitement. it's that he never feels like him and Billy are the same person. Like, when Billy turns into Shazam, he seems like he's turning into a completely different person. Like, you don't sense that through line between the kid and him. Like, it feels like they're two different people. And ideally, Captain Marvel, Shazam, should feel like a child coming through an adult's body, eyes, mouth, words, all those things. And, I mean, reading the script, the two main people I always read the characters being cast as, if you had to cast somebody who could hold their own against The Rock, I either chose two people that know him very well. Either Channing Tatum of Magic Mike XXL and G.I. Joe Retaliation fame, who had good chemistry with The Rock, and could really sell being like a big buff adult who acts like a kid. Or another guy, someone else who I think would be even better suited to this kind of role.
And his name is John C.
And he'd be great, right? I mean, it would be so much fun. At some point, you'd have to see John Cena and The Rock fighting with superpowers, and like, that's like I mean, Vince McMahon's, that's his wet dream, you know? And I do think that the script does a much, much, much better job of making it feel like Billy and Marvel are one person. And I think that is one of the failings of the movie. And I understand why it's a failing, because in that movie, Billy's through line is less important than Billy learning and understanding, loving and being a part of this family. So he almost becomes like a center point of a larger ensemble than being like the main protagonist. But in this, he's the only thing. There's not a bunch of like kids to share powers with, so he really is like the thing. And so yeah, and it has like a sweet ending. It has a little like, you know, post credits teaser throughout the story. There's like a younger love interest that it implies is a girl that has a crush on Billy, but it's revealed it's actually his long lost sister. Or it's implied it's his long lost sister. They were going to save that for being like a thing in a sequel, probably. So even back in 2008, they knew about how to drag a franchise out. It feels like it could be made into a fun movie. It had a really sweet storytelling style, and the theme's really powerful, and I don't know, I really dug it, and it's sad that it didn't get made. I mean, I'm glad this one got made. This one's making a lot of money and all that stuff, but you know, what could have been? So yeah, like I said before, I'm a huge script magnate person. I love screenplays. I have tons on my hard drive. I love reading scripts before they become, you know, movies. Like a couple of days ago, I read a script that Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse' son, Nick Cuse, wrote that's going to be a movie coming in October. And it's fucking really ridiculous and cool, and I think people are going to have a lot of arguments about it when it comes out. So, I don't know, if going forward, if occasionally you guys want to see videos about movies that didn't actually happen, or more script analysis type stuff, I can do that, because that's like my thing. So, thanks for watching this. If you liked it, please hit the subscribe button, and then like the little bell icon so you can get notifications for when I put out new videos. And if you have any requests or like, you know, comments and stuff, you can hit them up in the comments. You can, you know, disagree with me, not disagree with me, I don't care, whatever. So yeah, thanks. Have a great week.